Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members
Teresa, Linda, and Annie,
are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
Hi, I'm Tim Kennelty.
And I'm Jean Thomas.
Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We're here on our road trip to Cornell University in Ithaca, and we're really excited today, aren't we, Jean?
We're fangirl and fanboying about Toni DiTommaso. Tony's official title is a beaut. He is Professor and Chair, School of Integrative Plant Science, Soil and Crop Sciences Section. Dr. DiTommaso has agreed to sit with us and chat about a few of his projects.
We are so excited to have you here with us. Welcome, Tony.
Well, I'm happy to be here, everyone.
And we know that you have pages and pages of scholarly articles, but we'd love to just hear what your background is and how you got here today.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I mean, it's a pleasure. So I'll give you the quick rundown. As you probably could tell from my last name, this is an Italian name, so I'm originally from Italy. I was born in just south of a city called Salerno on the Amalfi Coast. Beautiful region.
Yeah, beautiful.
And for whatever reason, my parents, when I was 9 years old, decided to move to, of all places, Montreal, Canada.
Wow.
Where when we got there in May, there were still snow piles, and I was like, oh, this is crazy. And of course, didn't speak French or English because that is French Canada. So I grew up in Montreal, which was great, really multicultural city, and went to school at McGill University, which is kind of one of the top schools in Canada in environmental science. I was very interested in nature. Being from Italy, I would hang around my dad, always gardening, and then went on to get my master's degree in ecology, plant ecology, and returned. And that was at Queen's University, which is in Kingston, Ontario, just kind of north of Watertown on the Canadian side of Lake Ontario.
Still in the snow zone.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And cold.
Cold. Yeah, I could remember listening to the radio, kind of an off the cuff here, and Kingston, Ontario would get basically an inch of snow, and then we'd hear that in Watertown they're getting basically 3 feet. And who knew that 20 years later I'd be just south of there. So I returned to McGill, got my PhD in biological weed control, which was something that I was very interested in. Taught at McGill for 4 years, and then Cornell came calling. It was just a great opportunity to come to Cornell, and I've been here since 1999.
Wow.
Teaching undergraduate and graduate courses in weed science and also in integrated pest management. I co-teach a course with two other professors, a plant pathologist and an entomologist. That's to say then that the three sub-disciplines of crop protection are all there, and it's great to bounce ideas by when the students are listening to these. And all three of us are there at all times, which is interesting.
We have this great memory. We, as master gardeners, came in 2016 for a tour of Cornell University, and our fondest memory is you taking us into the weed garden, the weed and poison plant garden. And we have photos. We were just looking at them last night. Such a great experience. First of all, you're a great lecturer and explainer of the garden, but also it was just so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I've always been interested in having. So when I got to Cornell, we had folks there that were really good at handling plants and so forth. So when the opportunity came to build this garden or have it really improve it, what better way than showcase these plants and open it up to the public? And this day we've got close to 120 species of weeds, invasive plants. Also, we inherited the poisonous plants from the vet college when they went through the renovation. So we are also housed now these poisonous plants, particularly for vets. And, vet students, they use the garden because particularly for livestock.
Right.
So these are poisonous weeds.
Poisonous weeds,
Okay.
exactly. And we also have invasive plants, particularly of forest understories. So not only agronomic and human health and livestock problem plants, i.e. weeds, but also invasives of natural areas. So any of your listeners have an opportunity to come up to Ithaca or the campus, they're certainly welcome. Best time probably to visit is sometime June, July when everything's in flower, but everything's labeled. And it's funny to see some of the visitors on.
And it's open to the public.
It is open to the
cool.
public.
Yeah.
And
And if you want to come look at my pictures, I have a photo album of every single weed that was there when we visited.
It was a little scary. She was reciting weed names last night. So yeah,
boy.
she's a weed fan girl too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an amazing place, and it's true. It's like you see it up close and personal, and it's not something that's ephemeral. It's there, and you can tell what it is, and if you have it in your garden.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's from my perspective as someone who's been teaching our, undergraduate students and gardeners, master gardeners. I mean, I get a pleasure out of when I notice folks actually, wow, their eyes light up. Now I know that's ground ivy.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what's in my lawn. And I've spent, I don't know how many years trying to pull it.
Well, and the beauty, too, is that you've got a plant growing there and it's growing to maturity. So you get to see what it looks like as a baby, as a teenager, in flower, in fruit. And that's because you usually only see these things at one stage. So if you're able to see the other stage and say, oh, I didn't know that was that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, when you down the road, when you start thinking about management and, why kind of getting to this new book or the second edition of the Weeds of the Northeast was, it all starts with you being able to identify the species and know what it is, and then the rest of information falls through. But you're absolutely right. Being able to catch something at the seedling stage, even in your garden, early in the spring, like what is that? I've given workshops to ag industry professionals that their goal is just to be able to identify plants at the seedlings, because they only have 1 or 2 weeks to spend to manage weeds, and then they got to move on to other things they're doing. And it is so valuable. And we actually do that in the weeds class that I teach, getting the students are wondering, why do I have to know it at that small stage? But
I want to go back in time and be a student in Tony's class, don't you, Gene?
Go ahead. I found out what time his class is, and the front row is empty.
But let's talk about Weeds of the Northeast, because that has been one of my favorite resources. And there's a new edition, and there's a whole controversy, or there's a whole mystery about the DiTommasos, right? And the DiTommaso connection to that book.
Yeah, tell us the legend.
Yeah, there's a legend.
The legend. You couldn't have made this up. So my first introduction to the other DiTommaso, and I should add that he misspells his name. He's just got one M, and he tells me that his great-grandfather, when they immigrated from Italy, it must have been in Ellis Island, he was just so happy to be in America that
Spell it however you want.
wherever you wanted.
Yeah.
But we have similar names. We are not related. His ancestry folks are from the eastern side of Italy, in the Puglia region, Bari, if any of you are familiar. And I'm from, like I said, the Naples region. But basically, I first knew of Joe when I was at McGill, sometimes receiving manuscripts or papers to review that were really heavy on the herbicide side of things. And that is not my expertise. I'm more on the ecology side. Obviously, they had made a mistake. So that's how I kind of knew about Joe a little bit. But then who would know that I come to Cornell in 99 and for an interview. And of course, I found this out afterwards. Everybody was thinking, is Joe coming back to Cornell? Because 2 years previous to that, he had left for California. He's originally from California and wanted to kind of continue his career there. He had spent, I think, 10 years at Cornell in the same department as me, same name, teaching weed science, the same course. So 2 years later, I show up.
And had the book already been written, the original edition?
The original edition had come out in 97.
So you've been getting credit for it all along, too.
Oh,
You couldn't just take
stories
credit,
about
yeah.
getting credit for this. You could imagine. Yeah, I get to Cornell, and first of all, folks are thinking, because they saw an announcement that there's going to be an interview for a new professor, and they all thought it was Joe. Of course, they see me. Joe's 6'1". I'm 5'5", barely. Clearly, they recognize that I was not going to be that DiTommaso. And so, yeah, and so it's really crazy because I got to teach the same course he taught.
And he wasn't there at the time, so you didn't overlap.
We did not overlap. And that story just doesn't continue. And getting back to the original version, sure enough, as I'm teaching the course, I mean, students are not going to recognize that there's one M.
Right.
Assume that this is, well, and they were at Cornell, right? I mean, it was Cornell University Press. So, and I had to always say, I had to debate, do I tell them the truth that I'm not that?
Did you get any royalty checks by mistake?
Zero.
Did you autograph any of them?
Oh, no.
I would have shamelessly.
Yeah.
But the even weirder thing is that you end up being involved in the second edition, right?
I think that that's the case. And just so you know, the first version, as many of you know, I mean, it is it was the second highest weed identification guide sold in the world.
Right.
I believe 120,000 copies were sold.
It's a fantastic book.
Well, and it was magnificently bound because it's almost indestructible because mine is so thumbed through that, and it's still.
I think the paper's made from weeds.
It's got to be.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
Yeah.
It was wonderful, and I love it.
But basically, the story was that I got to know Joe and Joe Neal, who was also a professor at Cornell. These were the original authors. And Rick Uva was a graduate student at the time with Joe Neal, who now has a farm down in Maryland. But at one of our meetings, science meetings, we knew each other, and we got together and said, you know what? Been over 25 years. There's so many new species that have moved in. Some from climate change, others just movement of seeds and horticultural crops.
And that's really the reason, right? Because you're starting to see all these weeds that weren't there, right?
Exactly. And we, if you kind of think about it, we added 200 species to this. And of course, now the coverage of the area includes the mid-Atlantic states from North Carolina. We go all the way to Wisconsin. And we include a lot of kind of nursery species. Joe Neal is expertise in ornamentals, and of course, he's down south, and I've been watching these species come into.
Is that the main reason why you added some of the southern species? Because we think they're coming north.
I think that's absolutely. I mean, some are
The
being.
kudzu is coming.
Oh, kudzu's coming. It's established. I've been working on Johnson grass. It's been here, but now it's growers are noticing it. It used to behave as an annual. Our winters were too cold for the underground stems, the rhizomes, think quackgrass. They would get killed, but our winters have been so mild that now we're starting to see it survive as a perennial and not as a seed. And of course, they have a lot more energy and they're much more difficult to control. So
you're getting ahead of the process, actually.
We're getting, right. and so we thought this is kind of our last work of art.
No.
You got another 25 years to do.
No, there's going to be a third edition. We know that.
Well,
with more weeds.
Joe DiTommaso's retired, but it was great. So we actually started this project, I would say, about 4 or 5 years ago, kind of thinking about it. But when COVID hit, I think is when we really made the greatest progress. Right. And part of it was that we were quarantined in our homes. And thank God for Zoom. I mean, as much as, we talk about it, we were able to share files and come up with what species should we include. We also canvassed, surveyed other weed scientists in the region. At our meetings, we put up a board and asked them, what species would you like to see? My first one that I know should have been in there in the first place was wild parsnip, Pastinaca sativa.
Nasty
it's if you remember, it's in the carrot family, but it's the only yellow flowering plant you see along field edges, roadsides. It can cause blistering. If you get the sap on your skin on a sunny day, it can be a bit like giant hogweed.
So if not for COVID, the second edition might not even be out yet.
We might not have had the time to do it. And I think the other kind of positive was that Joe Neal was on sabbatical in New Zealand and used that time to really make, and if you noticed from the first edition, he's now the lead author of the second edition just because he really put so much time. But I was in there because I was the only one still left in the Northeast.
And you're the only one that spells your name right.
And the only one. No, so it was just a great honor when they asked, we'd really love to have you here. And I go, now we're really going to confuse folks. It's going to be like Neal, Uva, DiTommaso.
It's an amazing resource. I mean, we were looking through it last night. It's an amazing resource. Beautifully done, beautiful detail, beautiful photographs. But my biggest question is, how did you choose what to add? Because it's kind of tough, right? There's so many weeds out there.
Like I said, part of the process was surveying and talking to colleagues in extension outreach, gardeners, just our own personal experiences over the years. What was confusing, what was misidentified in the original book. There are some cases. We have new pigweeds that have moved into New York.
Oh, boy.
Something called water hemp and Palmer amaranth, which I was hoping would never get here because from tremendously competitive plant, resistant to a number of our key herbicides. So brought in, I should add, contaminated combine from the Midwest in the region. This, again, the movement of seeds and of vegetative parts, that's the problem. And now with that, if climate is more favorable to these more southern species, that was part of our thinking too, was what are the species, how are they migrating in 10, 15 years? To the best of our knowledge, what are some species? I mean, for example, we didn't have in there things like garlic mustard.
Really?
Japanese stilled grass.
Right.
That now have been...
They're almost ubiquitous in some places.
Right. And so that was part of the thinking. And we had to check out a number of the species just because we didn't want the book to become so large, voluminous that we'd have difficulty. Because we wanted to be, handled, as Gene said,
A handbook, right?
Yeah, handbook.
It's a heavy
for
handbook,
everybody. And in the choices, how did you determine, like, I'm a gardener and I live next to a golf course, so I see all kinds of weird stuff. Did you have more of a focus on commercial crops and their weeds and a section for just that, and then others for, like, garden crops and nurseries and that kind of thing? Is there a division? Is there a...
No, it was really across the board. Because we have expertise, we had Rick Hoover, who's a gardener. He grows vegetables and he grows, flowers for, dry flower arrangements. Joe Neal, ornamentals, nurseries. I was more agronomy, crop science. So it was basically, we all came up with our lists. And I, being an avid gardener, I thought deeply about plants that I often see and are the most difficult to control in my once I get them in there.
So it is universal.
Bindweed,
Yeah, bindweed, crabgrass. Yeah, and I can tell about crabgrass. So can I just give one piece of advice? Because we're at that time of year right now.
Yeah.
All of you that are gardeners, you should get it. I know days are short and, it's warm today, but it's going to get cold and you forget about your garden. The crops are out. They're probably fried. They're done. But you really need to get into that garden and make sure none of those weeds are going to seed. Because that's kind of, and I make that mistake in the sense, like we get so busy and you get home, it's dark, you're not going to go in the backyard. But really, this is where those weeds are now, have escaped, those that haven't been controlled, and they're just setting seed.
You're talking about like still grass.
Oh, crabgrass. I mean, some of these plants...
Artemisias.
Yeah, 30,000 seeds, 40,000 per plant. And you've done everything well up to September when you were harvesting your tomatoes in October, even before a frost. And then this happened. So it's one of my little things that I've always told folks. And I don't live by it, unfortunately. But it's something that makes a big difference next spring.
We're going to separate that out as a PSA and just keep airing it by itself.
No, but it's really true because you kind of get behind then, right? It's like I find that with garlic mustard, if you don't get on top of it, it just takes over and it's kind of like endless then.
And it's a little pathic, so it basically will keep your crop and so forth. But yeah, we can talk more about the virtues of weeds, but...
Okay, yeah, definitely. So I have a definitional question, and that is, we talk about invasive plants, we talk about weeds, but all weeds aren't invasive, right? But all invasives are weeds. Is that correct?
That is correct. So we have a lot of weeds that I wouldn't necessarily call invasive. So what does the invasive mean? It basically means that they take over. These are plants that get established and then dominate an area and excluding other species. That is an invasive, basically this ability to kind of displace everything else.
And does it have to be to you non-native to be invasive, or could it be a native plant, like poison ivy we were talking about before?
Absolutely. Common ragweed is a native plant. Yeah. So I think that's kind of something we have to keep in mind. Realizing, of course, that about 75% of all of our weeds, what we call weeds, are non-native.
Right.
And a fair number are invasive from other regions, and we can get into why they're invasive. But you're right. In terms of the definition, Not all weeds are invasive. So, for example, you might have a species, yeah, we see it. It's almost natural. It's part of the landscape. But you would never say, oh, this thing has invaded, has taken over a region. Whereas invasives, like I said, I've worked on this plant called swallowwort, which is milkweed look-alike. It's a vine brought in as an ornamental, still trying to figure out why.
Right.
From the Ukraine and southwestern Russia. And in its native range, you can't find it. If you go back to the Ukraine, it's hardly there. You have to search for it. We can get up here in Jefferson County and some of our counties along Lake Ontario, and I could show you, 100 acres of the typical kind of like, what has gone on? How does this plant go from being rare to now, taken over? And there's a bunch of reasons and hypotheses, one of which is basically it was brought here without its natural enemies.
Right.
And nothing here eats it. So, for example, deer don't touch it. Even goats don't really want to do anything with it. The chemistry is a little...
If a goat doesn't eat it, man, it's unpalatable.
Yeah, it's definitely one that the vet students have circled, in the weed garden. But yeah.
But so invasive is like, it's about the spreading characteristics, whether it's by rhizomes or seeds or...
Exactly.
So there are some things that are in the book that are weeds, but aren't invasive, is what you're saying.
Exactly. They might be problematic in agronomics, cropping systems, just because they're good competitors taking up nutrients and water, but they, on their own, or they're generally easier to control. But these other species that we call invasive, literally, if you think of Japanese knotweed along riversides, it's just complete cover. Or 10 years ago, purple loosestrife was everywhere. And those those species that in particular are kind of, I'd say, on steroids, that are just, population explosion.
So I think one of the great things about the book is kind of the first part to the solving the problem is identifying what you have. And that's really the great thing about it, because you have photos of the plants at different stages of their life, even the seeds in some cases. So that's the first part of the battle, because a lot of times people don't even know what they have. That's the first thing that usually somebody asks me if I come to their property. That's like incredibly valuable. And that, I assume that's why you put so much information about how to identify the plant into the book.
Yeah, that's absolutely was the exact. And in my undergraduate course, when, first thing I talk about is how can you be thinking about managing something if you don't know what it is? It's kind of like there's a military knowing the enemy, if you consider it the enemy, is like, okay, what do we know about it? And let's first IDing. And then after that, these other questions come in about its biology. How does it reproduce? What is it? Is this an annual species? Is it like a lamb squatter or a pigweed that just goes from one year to the other via seeds? So if you can stop seed production versus a field bindweed, a quackgrass, Canada thistle that have these underground vegetative structures that are so difficult to control.
Spotted knapweed or something.
Spotted knapweed. So yeah, absolutely. And that's why we put so much emphasis on ID, including seed identification. All of them seed, and there's a part within the description where we talk about what are some lookalikes. What's the difference between this species who you might confuse, and that is really helpful to, and we point you to if we have that included. Take a look at the difference. The leaves here are this shape, the leaves there are not. And we've tried to do it in a language that's accessible to the general public. We've tried to do our best to keep scientific jargon out. We want people to know what the appropriate name is and so forth, but we didn't make it such that you needed your glossary every 2 minutes because unless you're keying out. It's really in visual. That was kind of that's why we spent so much time with
and
photos.
that was brilliant. And you also have keys in there, which are usually a tool for only the experts and stuff, but you've got keys that are accessible. So if somebody does need to go back to that kind of level and go forward identifying, they're usable.
Absolutely. And we have comparison tables. How do you tell the clovers apart? If you have clovers, how do you tell the pigweeds? Because we have so many of them. So these were all brought to us from people like your listeners that were saying, Tony, I'm always confused. How do you tell a purple dead nettle from something like ground ivy? They look alike, or common mallow. And so those have always informed. I learned as much from the avid gardener, master gardener, or the farmer. They know their land so well But it's also, I've used this in my extension outreach to tell folks out there, if you notice something new you've never seen in your garden, in your lawn, rather than just dismissing it, this is the opportunity to kind of try to ID. And because something might have been brought in with compost or bringing in some soil, and you could start have a real problem with an invasive, as we talked about, and you'd be surprised how often that happens.
I think the book is super accessible. I mean, we were looking at it, and it's in-depth enough that I'm sure experts are using it or people who are professional. But also, I think for the common gardener, I think it's super usable. So I assume you're getting that feedback so far from folks.
Yeah, I think I'd gotten some information back that in the first 6 months, I think 4,000 copies have already been sold across the board from, it's now on Amazon, it's all over the place. Yeah. And some folks are giving a couple copies to neighbors, and they were like, wow, this is exactly what I needed. I wanted to know that goldenrod as a seedling. I wasn't pulling that out of my garden, or I wanted to keep it. And that's what I really want to see. I mean, at the end of the day, is for people to be able to know what they have. I'm a bit of a plant junkie. I love to identify things, native species, non-native. But more importantly, from a gardening perspective, and certainly for our farmers, this is really important.
Okay, you teach about the effects of weeds on the environment, and conversely, the effects of the environment on weeds, and I'm assuming you're doing a ton of research about that and going forward, and you're leaning more toward IPM and hand-to-hand combat than in lieu of chemicals. This book is a result of a lot of that research, but you've accumulated a whole lot more data as well.
That's right. Like I said, this is the first stage, and if you're thinking about an attack, this is the first stage. Know what we're dealing with, and then kind of the research in terms of the management, the kind of questions I ask, what is the life cycle of this plant? Where does it typically occur? But more importantly, from an integrated pest management perspective, and you're absolutely right, Gene, that I do come at it from using herbicides as the last resort. That's what integrated weed management. You can still use herbicides, but it shouldn't be your first thing. Okay, I've got Roundup, I'm going to go and put it. Is really thinking about, turn the question around, and is, what is it that I'm doing that's allowing these plants to dominate this area? Am I tilling too much? Am I bringing in compost that's contaminated or seed? And try to get it at from that perspective, kind of more longer term, more sustainable type. There's no question there are going to be some situations where you do have to resort, if that's something you'd like to do, to
poison ivy.
Poison ivy, even something like Japanese knotweed that's just, you can cut it down. I mean, unless you want to keep cutting every 3 weeks for 3 years. And I'm all for keeping our herbicides as a last resort and really trying to minimize their overuse, not only from an environmental perspective, but also we're going to run, and we are running into resistance.
Right.
Some of these weeds have developed resistance to not just one, not to multiple. And so this is, of course, a real problem for our growers, and we want to make sure that we still have some of those valuable chemistries available in the toolbox when needed. And so, yes, coming out of this book is also kind of behind it is a first step in integrated management, and then bringing some of the research that we're doing in terms of mechanical control, cover crops. So, for example, I now use cover crops, vetch particularly, and winter rye in my own little garden. And I have a small garden, 10 feet by 20. I mean, it's not. And I already notice a difference in terms of suppression of weeds and the soil health. And that's something we should all be kind of think about.
I guess kind of the knee-jerk reaction for some people is, oh, I have a weed. It's called a weed in my garden, so I have to get rid of it. But that's not necessarily true. Like, there's stinging nettle and pokeweed and dogbane and milkweed. Well, and first of all, common names of plants a lot of times are called weed, and they're like great plants, right? So how do I know if I look in the book and I find something, do I get rid of it or do I keep it because it's a host for a butterfly or whatever?
Well, that comes up to the crux of what weeds are, a weed is what? Is a plant out of place, right? And the first question I ask my students first class is, tell me, what's a weed in your mind? And then the question I ask, before humans were around, can you name the weeds that were present? And they're like, clearly they were there. We had plants. Ragweed was was here. But then when the first settlers came and started disturbing the soil, these plants thrive in that's why when we till our gardens and we would just leave it, guess what happens? Or a new housing development, they stop. These plants come in, and that's, in a sense, that's their ecological role. They're there to protect the soil. These plants we call weeds in agriculture, and don't get me wrong, they're tough to control.
And you're not talking about really invasive plants now. You're really talking about weeds like pokeweed and things like that that come in as kind of the first plants.
Right. They're like the first colonizers trying to basically protect soil from erosion and so forth. So they have an ecological role. It's now, and when every time we're tilling our gardens, think about it, we're pushing succession back to the earliest stages where annuals will dominate. But if you would leave your garden go, and we all can see this, right? When a farm's been abandoned, what do you start seeing 5-6 years later? You got goldenrod, New England aster, you got some saplings coming in. That's kind of typical succession, at least in our region, of kind of then moving into trees and so forth. But it's nature's way to kind of protect that soil. So as we're moving to minimum till or try not to disturb the soil to increase soil health, we're now kind of understanding that it's okay. Some of these plants have a role. And you're right, what's a weed? Ralph Emerson, a plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered.
Right.
But again, when I'm with farmers or growers where they have real problems, you have to obviously recognize that, yes, that's not the species we want to be growing right now, right?
But if you're a homeowner and you are trying to support wildlife, I mean, I keep some wild areas in my garden where I just let the stinging nettle and I stay away from it, or the goldenrod, the Canadian goldenrod, which is super aggressive. But it also has some value to pollinators and things like that as well.
At this time of year, that's what a lot of our, the beekeepers, they have a role. They're native, but in a sense, you're right, they can be aggressive. But I do likewise. I leave some milkweed kind of on the side, flowering. And I have like fennel, all these species, herbs that bring in all these, what I would call beneficials. But I just love that kind of diversity. And I try to keep some of the other species that I know might be more problematic. I get a lot of common purslane. I eat some of it, and some of it I don't. But I think we need to kind of turn it around and also appreciate these plants for what they are. I marvel at the ability to survive when we throw everything at them. Think about your tomato plant. Can you have it growing in the cracks of a cement sidewalk? I can show you a pigweed or a lambscourge that's definitely there.
They're pretty amazing, right? You do have to kind of yield them for that. But the really invasive ones, I'm sorry, I'm not amazed by anymore. I just want to get rid of them.
He's terrified. He is in fear.
Well, and I mean, in some cases, you're justified. Let me just pick on one, our favorite, Japanese knotweed. Some people call it wild bamboo. I have beekeeper friends. It is the best nectar pollen species in August in kind of central New York. They would swear by, you do not touch this plant. I told them, don't worry, it's not going to be eradicated.
Right. You're not getting rid of it.
But it is so aggressive in terms of you don't want it near a house or, because it literally, those rhizomes, underground stems, basically can poke right through foundation. Well, I have seen sidewalks, I've seen asphalt driveways being lifted. You just have to Google this. If some of your participants go on Google and type in Japanese knotweed getting into a home.
No, I would be frightened by that.
And you will see it in this poor British couple in the UK, just a couple of young kids, and they get in there, and I thought it was a house plant at first, and then I realized that it's Japanese knotweed coming out of the baseboards.
It could be a house plant.
And it is so scary. It is so scary to see that this plant, and they lift up the baseboards of their floors, and you see all the
and we're not gonna eradicate those. I mean, I think that's one of the things we need to understand, right? I mean, we maybe can manage them. It's the same as garlic mustard. I was just having this heated discussion with someone who said, "Oh, it's so delicious, it's so great." You have to eat a lot of garlic mustard to get rid of garlic mustard.
Well, that's the same with common purslane. Yeah. I mean, how much purslane?
You got to be really hungry for purslane to get rid of all your purslane, I think.
But I think the key is, though, for us to appreciate their value in many other ways. Yes, they're problematic, as I talk about. This is job security. I mean, there's. Do you as a gardener?
I think you have job security forever if you're talking about weeds.
Well, I tell the students it's death, taxes, and weeds.
And weeds, yeah. Oh, I love that.
But do any of your listeners ever say in the spring when they're about to start gardening, I think this year I won't have to go, weed. I
No
think
weeding.
it's just not
No
going to happen.
weeding.
It's no.
Well, except the ones that think their lawn's going to become a meadow if they don't weed it.
Oh, yeah, no, that's right.
Fool's paradise.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. You have to. I mean, that's the thing. It's we're trying to manage the environment, right? We're trying to have control over it, and it's challenging to do that.
Yeah, because they all each have their niche and their role, and they will fight it out, and kind of it comes to stabilizes. And my own lawn, I don't take care of it. I haven't fertilized in 20 years.
Yeah.
I mow it.
Yeah.
But it's basically a diverse of white clover. And you know what? I've not had any Japanese beetle problems because they have a hard time laying eggs in this tougher. It's not just Kentucky bluegrass. That's just.
I think we have the same lawn. I mow the weeds. It's
Oh,
not,
mine has
there's
time.
no grass.
Yeah.
I've got, mine is like a miniature continent. There's the high, dry mountain part of the lawn. There's the swampy part, and I got the thyme over here being all purple, and the other stuff that I can't mow until August.
They say landscape reflects the personality of the person. So you know what that says, right?
It's accurate. We are running out of time for now.
We're talking about some really depressing things, but you're talking about knotweed entering your house, which now I've got to go check the downstairs of my house. You do all this work with weeds and invasives. Tell us what gives you hope out there, that when you work on a daily basis.
Oh, working with students, of course. Some of the brightest minds, to see them.
They're going to solve our problems.
I tell them our generation created it.
Yeah.
You guys are
Good.
smart. You're at Cornell. I'm looking to you guys. But no, I think that's the case. Like I said, I also admire these plants. With everything we throw in, the hurdles, the challenges, given where we are in the world today, with all the issues we're all facing, whether it's climate change or wars and so forth, to look at these plants and maybe marvel and say, if they can get through it, we should be able as a species to kind of come together and learn a little bit from. They're trying to repair the planet in the best way that they can, even though obviously they interfere with some of our activities. So both, and seeing young people just amazed at this diversity, that kind of makes my day more than any publication. And being in the garden for me is therapy. It's just the way I do it, and I really enjoy teaching young folks.
I think we need to hang out with more young'uns then, Gene. What do you think?
Maybe. Boom. Okay, Boomer.
Thank you so much for being here. Man, we always learn so much, and we love your book. Everybody go out and buy Weeds of the Northeast, second edition.
Everybody needs a copy.
Well, great, Jim and Gene. It's been a pleasure, and I'm always happy to talk to folks that are interested in gardening.
Thank you for being here.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Sandra Powers and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acre. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities